So, yeah, really glad to have a chance to reconnect for our Saturday meditation. And as we were already just talking about this great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh passing away yesterday at the age of 95. So sort of he's internationally very, very well known as one of the main people who brought Buddhism to the West. And the first book on Buddhism that I ever read was a book that he had written back in 1991. Probably I was, 15 or 16, and set certain behaviors of mine from that time onwards to some degree, and then he's influenced entire generations of people. So I thought maybe we'd spend a little time just pondering about that. In the message that was sent from the meditative community called Plum Village that he'd run on the occasion of his death yesterday, they had a couple of brief messages. One was saying a cloud never dies, which is a saying that he's said many, many times. A cloud never dies. So I was going to look at that a little bit and unpack what he's meaning. And another one was really speaking to his very, very poetic style of teaching. He said, and I don't have the quote in front of me, but basically, after I die, I will reappear in the form of like leaves or a flower. And one time you will see that leaf or flower and you will recognize it as me and you will smile and I will be very happy. And sort of indicating this is quite unusual, like quite kind of cosmic way of seeing himself and death and birth. And so I wanted to unpack that a little bit as well and spend a bit of time getting a feeling for what he's trying to convey. And the simplest aspect of what all of that is trying to convey is that the boundaries on how we define ourselves, that we are each a concept. We are the central concept in our own mind, in our own conscious mind, our own story. We're always thinking, I'm doing this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do the meditation class, and after the meditation class, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I had this for lunch. And so there's always this constant storytelling. And whenever you're telling a story, and humans are natural storytellers, right? It's just the deepest, best way we learn. Whenever you're telling a story, the key aspect of storytelling is you're omitting all the details. The details don't matter. What matters is sort of the essence of how these concepts fit together. And so when we say I, I'm omitting all the details, right? All of when I think I'm going to go do this, I'm not thinking about, what are my feet going to do? I'm going to go take a walk. I'm not thinking about what are my feet going to do. I'm not thinking about what my brain's going to do. I'm not thinking about my blood flowing through my body. None of those details matter at all. Because what we're actually dealing with is just this concept, and just a word, just an I, just a word, a label. So we can talk casually about the universe, and I can say, oh, the universe is like this. Planets like this person's like this cell is like this, atoms like this, and I can talk about each of those with equal ease because they're all just concepts, they're all just words, and in every case we're sort of throwing away all the details. Now the significance of this is that we're not really these concepts are only very loosely related to reality. There's only they're just a story that we tell. And our story of ourselves is only very loosely related to reality. We're in fact ignoring that every atom in this body has come from, for example, the food and the water and the air that we've drunk over the course of our life, that our cells are constantly dying and being reborn, that our thoughts are coming in and out. They've been borrowed from so many other people, and we share ideas with others, that we can't really separate ourselves from our cultural context. And no matter what angle you look at it from, you realize that defining ourselves in this very narrow, specific way is an exaggeration, as like one particular person, one place and time is an exaggeration. So what we're doing when we meditate, just even simple meditations, is the breathing meditation is just beginning to wake up to the body and like just becoming aware. Oh, right. There's this body that's coming along for this ride. Oh, and it's breathing. It's changing constantly, and we're just reshifting our attention to what we thought was us. And that allows us to shift the story a little bit and begin to recognize that there's a story of this physical being here, and there's a story of the movement and change, the breathing. There's a story of the emotional being here that we are. There's a lot of other stories. There's a story of what's going on in our mind as we become more aware of that. And we typically do two meditations, right? We do the meditation on the body and the breathing, and then we'll typically do a meditation on our social circle, our social network, who influences us, who are we connected to, and so forth. And then we realize with that not only are we dependent on a body, not only are we dependent on breathing, not only is there's this constant internal movement of feelings and thoughts and so forth, but we're dependent on others, right? So the opposite of self is other, right? And normally we feel good, usually, hopefully we feel pretty good about self. And maybe we feel bad about self in different ways, but whatever, self is very familiar. It's like a very, very closely held, but then others, not so sure about others. So typically quite a lot of gap and distrust and misgivings and blame, or maybe some attachment or fascination with others, but but there's a gap there, a gap between self and others. And they feel like they're definitely different, right? So what we do in the second part of the meditation, we kind of bring others in. We basically imagine others around us. And then sometimes I remind myself and you that these others that exist in our mind, right? We sort of, that when we're imagining someone else, well, they exist in our imagination. So of course we should have some influence over how they act and what we think of them in our imagination, so that others are not truly different from our mind, but also our mind is not truly different from others, because these are the people who have made us. Our parents, physically made us, mentally, culturally, the people around us. We can't really say that there's an I that's independent of all these other people. We're very much a product of others, even down to the physical level, even our body. We tend to think I was born in 1976, but sorry, who was born? Like, who's this person who was born? Like, so it's like I'm implying that there was some me that just happened to get born. Oh yeah, my parents were involved somehow, right? But I was born in 1976. This funny story that we tell, right? And I'm I'm a proper materialist in a lot of ways. Like I believe that there's nothing about my body that isn't determined by genetics and outside environment, and I'm very comfortable with that explanation. So in what sense could I have been born, separate from my parents' genes? In fact, every cell in my body is a product of my parents' DNA, unfolding with the food and water and air and so forth that comes in. So there's nothing here that's not actually just part of my parents' bodies. It's incubated inside my mother's body, but like technically, when a baby is being incubated in a womb, it's kind of like a tumor. Like the mothers could have an immune reaction to that under some circumstances. It's a separate entity, but it's like just growing, entirely fed by the blood and nourishment and so forth of the mother's body. But it's basically a product of my mother's body for an enormous to an enormous degree. And that's a weird way of thinking. It's like a weird, shocking, it's like some um, product of my mother's body somehow popped out and started speaking and acting independently. That's like science fiction, but it's a profound way of saying that we don't own the body. We are not the person we think we are. We are not truly an independent person. We are very much physically, mentally, culturally, emotionally a product of our parents, our society, our the natural world. And so that's just some sort of prelude to some aspects of what then influenced Thich Nhat Hanh's thinking. But why don't we take a bit of time just with that preliminary to go in and do some meditation, pondering our body itself, and then I'll go deeper into these points that Thich Nhat Hanh had made. So we can begin our meditation again just by taking stock of our body itself. We reduce our movement, we reduce external distractions, closing our eyes if that helps. And we just take a deep breath in and out. Then another breath, and just allow our whole body to relax. And another breath, and we just ask ourselves, what is important right now? And we can spend a bit of time just feeling our body and reawakening to its presence, especially this constant changing of our breath. Feel the breath throughout our body. Just try to notice wherever it's appearing. Keeping our attention on our breathing is an act of mental strength. But also, as we relax into it, it's naturally can draw us in, capture our attention naturally. And then, having settled our mind a bit, we can bring to mind our social circle, those who have helped us get to where we are now, our parents, teachers, friends, colleagues, even imagining people we dislike, non-human beings, and so forth. We imagine that we are in a peaceful, beautiful, uplifting environment, and that these others are around us. But rather than holding them in an ordinary way, we imagine them all as being peaceful, happy, virtuous, and delighted to be engaging in meditation along with us. We recognize how much they've influenced us and imagine that they are experiencing joy and happiness alongside us in the meditation as a way to give back to them. So imagine these people around us and feel that they have been extraordinarily kind in their influence. Our parents, the source of our body, teachers, friends, the source of our thoughts and understanding, people who grow food that we consume, the animals in the natural world that we depend on, our companies, economy, society, governments. Just reflect on the kindness. recognizing that there is nothing that we have, nothing that we are, that has not directly or indirectly come from others. We set a determination for the last minute or so to repay the kindness of others by developing respect for them and humility and helping in any ways we can. This arises from meditation. So, so as I mentioned, Thich Nhat Hanh passed away yesterday at the age of 95, surrounded by his students and community in his, I believe he was in Vietnam in his traditional monastery. I don't know if, yeah, great. I didn't, I haven't had a chance to refamiliarize myself. So if I get any details wrong, I apologize. But so age 95, that means he was born in 1926, 7, something like that. So he was an adult when the Vietnam War started and was happening. And he became known initially, thank you, Eileen. Yeah, he became known initially for as a peace activist. He was well known as a Buddhist teacher in Vietnam, and became known during the war as a peace activist. And he drew the attention of folks like Martin Luther King and other folks in the U.S. who were also becoming active in the peace movement. And so Thich Nhat Hanh became known then, and I apologize because I'm forgetting the details, but I mean, he was in a war zone. I mean, the entire country was a war zone, so his life was at risk. There were political struggles between the Catholic-led government, and so he endured an enormous amount of difficulty and suffering and struggle and so forth when he was in Vietnam and leading this nonviolent peace movement, and having an effect on a lot of people in the US and in France. Obviously, Vietnam has a very close connection with France, even from the 60s and 70s. And so he came over to the West, both to the US and then eventually settling in France, I think, and began to teach in the West and began to figure out how to present these teachings in a way that would be acceptable for Western people and interesting. And one of his main characteristics that emerged was this poetry with which he described everything, in the sort of mixing of the natural world and natural analogies, and writing, literally writing poetry, but also just a very poetic community that he built, a community that was very focused on gentleness, living in a very simple way, having very warm, gentle connections, respectful connections with one another, other faiths, and so forth, and really spawning an entire movement. And so, again, as I said at first, probably I think is the first Buddhist book that I'd read and sort of helped set me on this path back in 1991 or 2 or whatever. although I've not spent a lot of time with his presentation in the years since, he's influenced the entire Western world. And so often what's happened is that Westerners became very interested in his teachings, very deeply moved, and so forth. And so there's been this long-term struggle, this decades-long struggle to figure out how to better integrate some of these teachings and practices into the rest of our business world. Something a little closer to home for me, like the technology work that I do is related to Salesforce.com, and the CEO, Mark Benioff, he's got lots of celebrity friends, and he basically adopted Thich Nhat Hanh as a friend of his, and Thich Nhat Hanh lived with him at his house, and he paid for his medical treatment and paid to establish a community of monks. And then at Salesforce, for example, every floor of their buildings has at least one mindfulness room, one little meditation room. And so, not to make this particularly personal, but that's extraordinarily helpful for me, because it's also helping to break ground about am I in an environment where there's a theoretical possibility of my sharing Buddhist teachings in a technical and business world where it might be well received. And so that end of the technology and business community that Salesforce represents, there've been a lot of people already breaking ground for decades in basically introducing this, and to the extent that for some teams, for some organizations, they'll at Salesforce and elsewhere, they'll start meetings with at least a minute or so to just be silent and to mindfully reflect, rather than just diving in. And I'm looking at Lisa as my coworkers. Maybe we can figure out some co-conspiratorial way to incubate some practices like that, at least in some areas. But needless to say, directly or indirectly, he's had an enormous amount of influence. But these two quotes were the two quotes that were cited in the notice from Plum Village that he passed away. And one is this quote, "A cloud never dies." So interesting to reflect on that. And the other, this very poetic description of, "In the future, you will see me as a leaf or a flower." So I'll start with the one that, in my mind, is a little bit more down to earth, ironically, that a cloud never dies. So in what sense is that down to earth? Not in any good sense. That's terrible mixing of metaphors. But what's that mean? A cloud never dies. So there are so many traditional analogies within the Buddhist tradition referring to waves or clouds, and waves and clouds as objects of contemplation. I live in San Diego, where typically you'll wake up in the morning and it's a bit cloudy. And then around 10 a.m. in the morning, all the clouds have kind of dissolved away. And we say the cloud cover's burned off, right? But the sun, what it does, the sun heats up the water so that it spreads out. So the water has this natural tendency to clump together. Like 2 drops of water, if they touch, they'll clump together. Water has this cohesive property normally. But if water is heated up, it becomes a gas, sort of dispersing, right? So what we see in the sky is the cohesion and the dispersion, depending on the heat of the water vapor. And when you see a cloud, are you seeing something solid? Like I thought when I was a little child, that you could sit on the cloud, ride on the cloud. Cloud is really just, there's nothing there, right? You fly up through the sky, you shoot right through it. There's nothing there. It's just an appearance. It's just something that obstructs light. There's enough water there to obstruct light, to make it look like it's something white. But if you were there, it's just a fog bank, right? So the cloud never dies. Like, what is a cloud? It is an appearance, right? That and I'm sure if you look at it with, I'm sure there's certain spectra of light that are not interfered with by the clouds. I don't know, certainly X-rays, but maybe even infrared light. You can peer through cloud cover. I'm sure NOAA and NASA have ways of peering through cloud cover, because whether the cloud doesn't exist for an X-ray, right? For visible light, it's obstructed and so forth. So that even the idea of a cloud, what is a cloud? It's just a name, right? Oh, it's a cloud. Oh, now it's gone. Oh, there's two clouds. Now they're one cloud. All of these things, they're just names. And so just through thinking about a cloud, you can understand not only the dependent relationship of natural phenomena, how the cloud doesn't exist separately from the air, from the sun, from the humidity, from the temperature. Nothing exists independently. The cloud, produces rain that nourishes crops that are harvested by someone, shipped. By the time they get to my body, they're well handled by lots and lots of folks. But we can say even our bodies are like a cloud in that they're a manifestation of all these other circumstances. Left alone in the wilderness, I would live for 48 hours, 72 hours. I'm not optimized for that environment. I can survive only in an urban environment at present. I'm just using myself as an example, right? I'm a product of this society, this urban society. It's like a certain kind of flower that can grow in certain environment, certain soil, but without that, just wouldn't exist, couldn't exist. If we had to give back all of the things that we had received from others in our life, we would have nothing, meaning like not even a body. Giving back the energy that we took in through food and so forth. We try to undo that, there's nothing left. Every cell in our body is just a little collection of oil surrounding some water and some other little gooey bits and so forth. But there's nothing in there that is different from cloud. Every cell in our body is like a little cloud. They break down, they form, there's nutrients coming in and out. So if you look at the body, if you look at the economy or the ecosystem or the natural world, at every level, there are systems, dependent related systems, things flowing in and out. But they're all finally simplified with this idea of concepts. And so this concept of I, Thich Nhat Hanh is saying a cloud never dies, implicitly saying I never die because I was never born. And this very profound truth. And then the second quote saying, I will appear as a flower or a leaf, and you may recognize me in future, and you will smile, and I will be delighted. So he's using this word I, right? In this strange way, very cosmic way. What do you mean? Like, oh, how is it that Thich Nhat Hanh has this power to appear as a flower? I don't have that power, right? Because our way of understanding ourselves, we understand I've got the power to walk around, but I don't have the power to appear as a flower, for example, because of our concept of I, because we believe that we actually exist. And with that concept, we're basically, in a sense, cutting ourselves off from our roots. The idea that prior to my birth, I was really just a part of my mother's body. At some point, then I become conscious and develop some sense of I. And then at that point, I'm like, oh, I'm here, independent being, independent me. What shall I do now? I think I'll scream and cry. But it is conception that creates these distinctions. It's mental concepts. So this blending of logic, science, experience, philosophy, appearing then in these, can take these seemingly cosmic forms or unusual forms. And Thich Nhat Hanh was a master of the poetic ways of describing this. Beautiful poem he's got called Call Me by My True Name. So if you want an interesting, beautiful poem, look up Call Me by My True Name, real name, and to get a taste for his teachings. So I'll end there. We can take just a minute to reflect on the kindness of teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh, who've brought such beautiful wisdom to our society, and develop a wish to develop this wisdom ourselves. When we make a decision to carry this wisdom into our daily life, contemplate as we go about the rest of our day, we can arise from meditation.